Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news on the local Colorado economy and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host, Chris Gorog, brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. Chris is personable and opens up with our guests on issues we all would like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's New Cyber Frontier.
Welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. You can see today in the studio I have here with me a special guest, Dr. Terrence Bolt. Go by Terry, right?
I go by Terry.
Terry's. Dr. Bolt is probably the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing in many aspects. My advisor at University of Colorado for my PhD work. The reason why I went there, I looked at other universities and, with your vast experience and background in cryptography and other things, definitely my decision for going to UCCS. So always wanted to thank you for that.
Thanks.
And all the other things that we've done there, and hopefully we'll do some more great things. But bringing you on today to talk about some things that you do in the biometric authentication. So welcome. Thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me here, Chris. Right. Biometric authentication is actually pretty broad. I've done a wide range of things. I've been doing biometrics since the mid-1990s. I've done a lot of projects for government-funded projects looking at face recognition, but I also developed a very good privacy-enhanced fingerprint biometric that's very non-traditional because it allows you to do matching and release keys, so it integrates with digital certificates and other things very well, because it allows you to take the approximate matching of biometrics and combine it well with digital certificates in the sort of exact world of cryptography. And coming up with an algorithm that could do that, it was very challenging. It took me 5 years to develop the algorithm. And then we commercialized it. Now it's been licensed off to some other companies, and I'm back doing more university-oriented research.
That and the Bachelor of Innovation program,
Yes,
which you started over there, and is probably the primary driving force of that local campus for University of Colorado.
We're around 590, 600 students out of 12,000. So we're a small, but it's a unique piece. And yes, I came to Colorado in large part to make this degree happen because I couldn't hire people in my own companies with the skills I wanted, and I recognized the problem was universities weren't producing the interdisciplinary skills we need. And biometrics as a subfield, or security overall, is a very interdisciplinary field. So the only way to get a cybersecurity degree has been to have a Bachelor of Innovation in Cybersecurity at UCCS as an undergraduate, because I want them to be able to talk to people who are not security experts, because that's where often the problem lies. It's a communication issue between the two groups. So they have to have the technical skills, but also be able to work with other people.
Okay, so let's rewind and say that's your kind of professional stance and everything. How did you get there? What was your start? I've never heard your background.
I decided to be a professor as long as I can remember, like 6th grade. I originally wanted to do physics. Got to college at Columbia University, found out that most people did not like their physics professors, talked to physics professors, found out how bad the job market was, and I switched to applied math knowing I would do something other than physics, and you're far enough along, you just switch to what's reasonable. And then I did my PhD at Columbia in computer science, studied originally theoretical aspects of computer science, numerical analysis, and then broadened out into computer vision. And I started working with various local companies, so I spent a year working with AT&T, then I moved on and I was doing work with Siemens, doing medical imaging, because I wanted my work to make a difference, not just publish papers, but to actually make things that really matter. So with Siemens, I worked on medical imaging and did a number of projects that they turned into commercial products and have patents in that space to help them advance their technology. And after I'd worked with them for a while, I realized, okay, I've learned enough now, and then I started getting involved in startup companies. I've been involved in 3 that were reasonably successful, meaning they made $7 to $10 million each before either being sold off or my leaving.
Interesting. So you said as long as you could remember, you wanted to be a professor.
Yeah.
What made you have that? I mean, some little kids like, hey, I see a fireman, I want to do that. Did you know somebody was a professor? Or did you have that example?
No, actually, in 6th grade, I was a tutor for most of my class in math and science and whatever. I switched school districts. I was ahead of the other kids in many ways and behind in a few others. So I spent time teaching other kids, and I really liked helping them learn how to solve problems and how to do things. And so that made me interested in being a teacher, but I was also interested in sort of physics, and I was reading very advanced things for a sixth grader. And so looking at sort of like Einstein and all these other guys who were super bright physicists, I said, that's really what I want to do, is go out and do that. I liked learning and doing new things. And I talked to teachers, high school, middle school teachers, and the ones I talked to didn't really like their jobs that much. I have some cousins who are teachers already, and they love their job in one sense.
So you knew even then college level was
where I want to be, because I wanted to keep doing new things, not do the same thing. So I like the teaching, but I also wanted to keep doing new things, and so that's what professors do.
Yeah, definitely. Let's take a break. We'll hear from our sponsors. Be right back.
Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. In the studio with me today, I have Dr. Terry Bolt, who is, among other things, my advisor at University of Colorado here in Colorado Springs. And for a while there was the acting chair, and I know professor of innovation. Explain what that means with your program there.
So my official title is a professor, Elpamar Professor of Innovation and Security. The innovation is really more the undergraduate program that I'm driving, but innovation to us is very broad. And so we're looking at more than just that. And then security is really where my research area is. And so I wear two very distinct hats. One is driving a novel undergraduate program, and the other is doing security-oriented research. And so I do a lot of research in biometrics and machine learning applied to various aspects of the problem, and computer vision overall, so it's not all just security. But the aspects of my research that are most interesting, or the largest funding I've had in the past couple of years, have all been in biometrics. How do we do authentication? And then how do we not just do authentication, but how do we identify people? How do we use more of the physical security sides of biometrics? So using it in surveillance, using it to answer strange questions, like given a database, find me all the people who are blonde, wearing a hat, and have a mustache, right? If you have that list, right? How do you make a computer vision system that can take that verbal description and go find those people? Which is not the traditional use of biometrics, but has been one of the focuses that my lab did.
Mm-hmm. Which kind of brings us to the topic of why we started looking at bringing you on today, is that particular capability can lend itself to not only some good things, but some questions about is there a privacy violation to who has that technology and what they're doing with it?
Yeah, so the privacy aspects of biometrics in a broad sense are very complicated. I've actually spent many years working on privacy-enhanced biometrics so that I could actually allow people to prove they're themselves without the government ever being able to search for you. So fingerprints, there's lots of databases of fingerprints. Everyone in the state of Colorado gave up their fingerprints when they got their driver's license. And the state can search through that database for all kinds of reasons, not just to make sure you don't get a second driver's license, which is the primary reason they collect it, so that you can't have someone steal your identity and then go try and get a driver's license in your name. They're going to do a biometric match to make sure this name and these biometrics, if they're already on file, go together. So there's some very positive uses of it, but obviously it can be abused if it's used incorrectly. So going back to those attribute things, one of the companies we talked to when my company was building that technology was actually, let's just say, a dating company that wanted that ability to put in verbal descriptions and find people that matched. We said, yeah, that's not a good use of the technology. We're not interested in working with that, right? But when the FBI or the law enforcement is interested in trying to find a missing child, and that's all they have is those verbal descriptions, looking through millions of uploaded illegal images and trying to find potential matches is something I would definitely want to help on.
So that question of who has the right, or as a technologist, do you get a chance to make that decision of where your technology has gone to and who's used it?
So you get a weak choice. As I said, we can choose not to work with certain companies. We could choose to not release our technology, but If I'm doing government-funded research, right, the government has certain rights to that research, so it depends on where it goes. And I think it's a fine balancing act to look between balancing privacy for all of it, for everybody, and at the other hand, trying to advance technology so that when the government needs to use it and wants to use it the right way, it actually works better and better. So the long-range video surveillance type of stuff I was doing naturally led me down to this path of doing long-range face recognition. How do I do face recognition at 100 meters or 200 meters? If I'm a soldier on a base and there's a car coming at me and it's driving fast, I need to decide if that person on it is in a watch list, if they're considered a threat, or are they one of the people from our base who's running from fire but in some non-traditional vehicle. I got to decide that very quickly while they're far away, while I still have time to react. That kind of problem is important for our military. It's important for saving the lives of our soldiers and women, and that's worth looking at. And if in doing that, we need to understand how to make algorithms that could be misused, because now I can use them on surveillance cameras that are on the street. Well, that's not the technologies. That's an issue of making sure we define the right policies to make sure we can do that. Once we have the technology alternatives, policies can say we will or will not allow them to do this. So San Francisco, banning the police from using facial recognition in the way they were using it, is a reasonable policy decision on their part. Although I will be interested to see how they handle some of the DMV issues with trying to actually check for duplicate licenses and whatever. But if there are places where people misuse the technology, and it's relatively easy to misuse the technology and say, this is a match. And I'll actually go back to fingerprints, because I think there's broad uses of that fingerprints where they also can be misused. Because the current government standard for fingerprints are, if an FBI examiner says it matches, it matches. There's no Dalbert science to say what's the probability of match. So I can take the reductio ad absurdum kind of argument. If I take your fingerprint and I match the whole fingerprint, I'm very sure it's you. If I take half your fingerprint, pretty sure it's you. If I take half that again, I'm pretty sure. But after enough, right? Once I get your fingerprint so that's 1 pixel, there's no way I know it's you, right? There's some blurry line between how much data do I have, and so science can help answer how good are those things and where are we, and then policy has to follow up. But when policy is broken, then it can lead to potential misuses when somebody goes or gets pulled in at least for questioning, even if they don't go to prison, because they're a partial match, like the Madrid bomber that was then found to be somebody in Oregon whose fingerprint happened to match because he had a military ID, and so his fingerprints were on file. And then they eventually decided it wasn't possibly him, but it takes a while. That kind of privacy balance is a difficult thing for the government to try and figure out how to do. Now, who has what rights to data in public? Our current rules are pretty clear, right? If you're in public, sort of the definition of public is you have no expectations of privacy. Your cameras can take pictures of you. There are thousands of cameras in this country, hundreds of thousands, millions maybe, dozens in this city alone that capture pictures of the street. Who has the rights to do what with that data? The courts have not found a very clear delineation between storage, because if there was an incident, we want to be able to go back and find out who committed the crime, right? And your right to privacy when you're in public. The right to privacy in public is not it's a sort of oxymoron, right?
It's a non-addressed thing.
Yeah. But the new GDPR in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation, that's raising some interesting issues. And 1 year later, some of the most recent news articles have looked at it and said it's not really addressing the problem people hoped, and it's causing all kinds of other problems. Because now I could legally not take a photograph in front of the Eiffel Tower with a bunch of bystanders in the background without their written permission. Okay, now, are people still taking photos there? Yes. But it will impact certain groups of people more than others. So if I'm a professional photographer, I might be held to a standard that says, no, I have to get permission of all those people. News crews running footage, right? Who's in the background of your photo is a tricky question, and what's their right to privacy in that?
Interesting. And how I know you've done some work with, like you said, with the bomber that somebody else had a matching fingerprint. So how often is it that you get false positives like that?
So first, I did not work in the bomber case. I just used it as an example. But false positives in fingerprint, it gets tricky to analyze because the government says if the FBI says it matches, right? But if you look at the number of cases that have been overturned that included fingerprints, it's a non-trivial amount, but it's still probably like 0.5%. Because generally, police use a lot of information, not just one little piece to decide that was going on. Facial recognition technology is far more inaccurate than fingerprints. And if you're looking at what they might do for the level of interrogation, like, oh, look, you match somebody who's on the terrorist watch list at the airport, they're going to pull you aside and talk to you, right? They already have that problem with names, right? They pull over lots of people that are not related. Faces are maybe a little more accurate than names, and maybe a lot less accurate. It depends on the quality of the photo they have of the person trying to match it against and what's going on.
But, I mean, you can never change your face. It's like the password that you can't change.
Oh no, actually, you can change your face. Lots of people undergo facial reconstruction surgery.
Well, it's not very...
It's not trivial to change your face, right?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. So using your face as your as your password for your computer, well, is it secure? Well, it depends on secure against what, right? Can somebody copy your face? Well, if the software is not very good and you can just hold a photo up, then yes, that's really easy to break into. If it's a better software that's analyzing how you're moving and whatever, what we call spoofing detection, then it can be okay. And if you use it, in the most important value for biometrics is as a multiple factor authentication. Face plus password is way stronger than either face or password because it's a lot harder to do both of them. And some of the technology I developed for fingerprints, we allowed you to do fingerprint plus password in such, that's how we actually made it so the government couldn't search for you.
Okay. Let's take a break. We'll come back to this topic because I want to talk more about some of the research I know I've seen over there at the university. Be right back. Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier, here with Dr. Terry Bolt, talking about authentication, biometrics, multi-factor right before the break. I know I've seen some research up there at the university where, like if you're doing a facial recognition on somebody's face versus a picture of them, we have to have a way to tell the difference. So somebody can't just hold a picture up and get facial recognition. And those subtleties or those can be done now with technology.
So we're getting better at it. It's a research area that's also very hard to evaluate because good spoofing is really hard work to do. So who am I defending against? The Mission Impossible mission guys or Joe Smith on the street who wants to get into my computer for some reason. You have to figure out what's the threat you're trying to defend against. But building full quality masks is very hard, and we're pretty good. We can tell the difference now for lots of these systems between videos and real people pretty well. We were also part of the Google Active Authentication project that looked at some of that stuff. But one of the things you want to balance is how hard do I make it for the regular user to get in? So if you get up first thing and you got morning face, you haven't had your coffee yet, does the computer not let you in because you just don't look like you anymore? So there's a balance as we go back and forth between ease of use and security, and we can crank those numbers up all the back and forth between them. But it's important that you think about what the user's using it for. Most people using it on their phone or the laptop aren't worrying about high security, right?
And that's the question. I mean, do you have an iPhone? Do you use those?
I have an Android device.
Would you use, knowing what you know, the face recognition on a phone?
Well, I use the fingerprint because it is harder to spoof and more accurate. And it doesn't have as many false rejections. So I've done the face stuff. I would choose fingerprint over face for my phone because the fingerprint never leaves my phone. It's just built into where it's going. And face is still much easier to spoof than fingerprint.
Okay, good point. So kind of the reason why we brought you on, there was some press in the Colorado Springs Independent and Financial Times about some of this authentication violation of privacy or possible. Can you explain what that was about and what your thoughts are on that process you went through?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I've been doing facial recognition research, in particular long-range facial recognition research for many, many years. And a number of years ago, we actually did a proposal to the Navy to address the problem of long-range maritime biometrics, because when somebody's approaching a ship or approaching their base, they want to be able to answer those questions. As part of that, towards the end of our project, we actually did an evaluation at 150 to 200 meters, which is our objective for the project, by basically pointing a camera looking down a sidewalk. We went through all of the campus IRB process even before we submitted the proposal, but because it's a public institutional review board, which is the group that reviews, is your policy putting people at risk? Are they doing anything that might be improper in terms of privacy or health risks or anything? We actually did that even before we did the proposal, because you have to for many of these proposals. And then years later, when we went to collect the data, we still followed that same protocol. We collected data, and actually the biggest risk to people's privacy in the way we collected data was if we actually talked to them. Because if we talk to them and get their names, then there are names associated with the faces. By just taking photos on the thing, we have no idea who these people are. There's no way anybody can say, here is the name associated with any photo, because we didn't talk to them. We actually did have a small group of people that we used in most of our publications that we did talk to, and we had a separate where they signed off that it's okay to use them in publications and whatever. But most of the people were collected and put in a database that we use for evaluation of our system. But that data actually had value at a research level beyond what we did. At the time in 2013, we didn't release the data. We then we released some features from it, but not the raw data. Then in 2017, we decided it was now long enough. We waited. There are people on campus that don't want to be photographed. We want to give them a chance. So if there's a military person who's come back, vet, we want to protect their privacy. They could be on some hit list for all we know, right? Even though we never really made the photographs public, they're in a data set that researchers have to sign a license to. They don't get it just for signing up. We wanted to make sure that we were protecting people. So we waited 4 or 5 years after we collected the data so that anyone who was likely an undergraduate is now graduated. They're no longer even on campus. So it's like not like you can say, oh, that's the guy I'm after. He's in Colorado Springs. It's 5 years later. Who knows where they are? So by waiting that long, we try to increase the privacy. We then collected the data and we distributed it to researchers, completely anonymized, so no one knows who anyone is. They're just subject 234 or 538. And the goal is for them to be able to now solve this long range and what we call unconstrained problem, because no one knows they're being photographed, which was part of our goal, because people don't always, if they know they're being photographed, they act differently. They look at the camera or whatever. Lots of the students are just looking down at their phone the entire time, which is what students tend to do as they're walking. And now that makes the recognition problem much harder because they're not looking at the camera. It gets harder when they're not. They're also not necessarily all in focus because the cameras can only focus in one point. So there's a lot of unconstrained parts of the data that makes it very hard. And we tested, in 2013, we tested some commercial algorithms, and in our competitions that we ran, so we ran these national competitions, international, I guess, these systems don't perform really well. And we're really trying to say, look, these don't work. And one of our goals is to be able to go back to the government and say, which is what we did in 2013, these systems are not ready for prime time. You can't use them the way you want. Right? There was some interest for one of our projects of them putting on a system for an automated weapons control system. It's like, no, it's not ready. You can't do that. Right? You got to wait. But you don't know that if you don't build these systems and evaluate them. So the privacy concerns came up because somebody has a particular agenda, pushed a couple of articles that said we're violating the students' privacy and the data was in the public domain, neither of which is true. Right? The students were in public. The definition of public is we can take their photos, right? And we went the extra step of waiting. So in my view, we were trying to balance what do we need to do our research and what are the privacy implications. We never gave the government the data, so people thought, oh, we're giving this as a government database. Like, the government didn't want the data. In fact, because it might have privacy implications, they're like, you collect it, you use it, tell us the answers. Don't give us the data. The government, as far as we know, has never downloaded the data, even though they could have taken part in a competition, they didn't.
And all this became talk about the publicity part of this.
And so the publicity part was unexpected, largely unwanted, but I understood where some people are coming from. Some of the publicity scaled up after the first article or two because there were miscommunications. Then people said, oh, you're doing all this. And some of them just don't understand the legal issues of what it means to take photographs in public, right? There are comments like, oh, this is like normalizing peeping Tom, and yet the surveillance cameras, there's way more of them than ours ever was, right? So we weren't doing anything outside the realm of what normal surveillance cameras do, except we were then using them to make face recognition systems better by analyzing their performances. And then the people who came, who were looking at some of this, some of them had an agenda probably to increase revenues of their sites. Others were, and if you look at the comments across these sites, it was interesting to see how many people really understand. No, this is public, it's not a problem. And then there's some people who are like, oh no, this is terrible. I want to be removed from the data set if I'm in it, whatever. We've given the opportunity for people to come and remove themselves. No one has.
So it was kind of at the responsibility of anybody to take a look at it, though, and say, hey, I might be in there.
Well, so we have no names, right? And I guarantee you the face recognition...
you don't even know who they are, right?
I don't know who they are, right? And the face recognition software, the best algorithms we know of, will find the correct person 30 to 40% of the time on this data. So we can't just run our algorithm and say remove... we can run and get some of them, but if they want all of them, they're going to have to look through them and say, that's me, right? And they might be able to remember what they wore 5 or 6 years ago and say, that was my jacket, that's my backpack. But we have no better way of doing it than we can automate it a little bit to let them find the closer matches. But the systems really do a bad job at these photos. They're really, really bad photos. They're not necessarily that much worse than what you see on TV when they say, does anyone recognize this photo? And it's like, it's a blob, right? I can't tell you who it is, right?
And how many times are we recorded now, no matter where we go? At a gas station parking lot, at a fast food place, downtown.
In front of every ATM, right? So there's tons of cameras around. We're being recorded lots of times, right? The concern, which I see a little bit of from the privacy point of view, is that we built this into a database, and people thought, incorrectly, that we were giving this database of these faces to the government so they could search for people. The FBI's database is currently like 460 million faces, more than the number of Americans. Chances are really good that anyone who complained was already in their database, because Colorado's a real ID state, which means our facial database is accessible by the feds. And everyone who's got a driver's license has their face in that database. That's way more useful to them than any blurry photos we've ever taken on our campus would be. So.
And you know what, the thing, when we start thinking about authentication and biometrics and how often we're recorded, and you know, how often you're in photos in the public, a lot of people don't really think about that. For them, it's a different issue that, there's a little bit of it's your database, something about the university. But if we just start thinking about that in the public domain, most of us don't think about it, but it's almost like there is no such thing as privacy anymore.
Well, there's not much privacy when you spend lots of time in public.
And what the other options are?
Well, no. So, but if your definition of like my face is private, then you better be a hermit, right? If you want to say what's going on behind closed doors, there's a lot of private things going on in people's lives that we don't know about. And I'm all for protecting privacy. That's why I developed fingerprints that were privacy enhancing, because the way they have a potential for being misuse is high enough that we want to protect them. Faces, however, because they are publicly viewable, really don't have much expectation of privacy, because they're out there all the time. Now, whether or not there's a tattoo on somebody's body in certain places, that might be considered private because you don't normally see those places.
Yeah, that's true. But I think the big thing I see here is, wow, if anybody's looking to get into this type of research and just to hear what you're doing there at the University of Colorado, it is pretty exciting. It's like, how many places are you looking for students to build on this and do work?
So I since the articles, the good side of the articles is there have been like 2 different groups that have now contacted me about doing more research in the space. So if they were hoping it was going to shut my research down, no, it'll probably increase the amount of research I do in that kind of space. There are lots of opportunities. There's lots of good unsolved problems. One of my current students has been working on a face recognition algorithm that is also privacy preserving. My algorithm I did for fingerprints didn't work so well for face. We're just developed a new one, so you could have a face matching system that allows you to match against it, but no one can ever search that database for you. So trying to address those privacy things is, in fact, part of my research agenda.
Awesome. So if you're looking to get into that field or whatever, University of Colorado here in Colorado Springs, this might be a good choice for you.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks for joining today, Terry. It's been a
Thanks,
pleasure.
Chris. Okay.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.